War changes people. Sometimes it changes nations. And sometimes it creates legends. In 1918, the First World War finally came to an end. For 4 long years, Europe had witnessed destruction on a scale the world had never seen before. Millions of soldiers marched into battle. Millions never came home. And those who did returned carrying scars that no one could see. Some could no longer sleep. Some couldn't return to ordinary jobs. Others questioned everything they once believed in. The war was over, but for many soldiers, the battle had only moved inside their minds. Britain itself was changing. Factories struggled. Crime was rising. Working-class neighborhoods were filled with poverty, uncertainty, and young men trying to find their place in a country that seemed to have forgotten them. It was in this world that one of television's most unforgettable characters would eventually be born. A man named Thomas Shelby. Millions of people know his face, his voice, his walk, his iconic flat cap. But here's the question. How much of Peaky Blinders is actually true? Did Thomas Shelby really exist? Were razor blades really hidden inside their caps? And were the Peaky Blinders truly the powerful criminal empire shown on screen? Or has one of television's greatest dramas rewritten history? Today, we're separating fact from fiction. This is the true story behind Peaky Blinders. Before we can understand the Peaky Blinders, we first need to understand Birmingham. Not the modern city filled with busy streets and towering buildings, but Birmingham more than a century ago. By the late 19th century, Birmingham had become one of Britain's greatest industrial cities. Its factories produced steel, guns, jewelry, glass, and machinery that reached every corner of the British Empire. From a distance, it looked like a city of endless opportunity. But beneath the smoke rising from thousands of factory chimneys, life was very different. Entire families lived inside cramped back-to-back houses. Many homes had no proper sanitation. Several families often shared the same courtyard. Disease spread quickly. Factory work was dangerous, and the wages were barely enough to survive. For young boys growing up in neighborhoods like Small Heath, Cheapside, Aston, and Bordsley, the future offered very few choices. You could spend your life working exhausting hours in a factory, or you could survive by whatever means the streets offered. Then things became even worse. During the economic downturn of the 1870s, thousands of young men lost work. Hope became scarce. Money disappeared, and the streets began to fill with angry, frustrated teenagers looking for belonging. Small neighborhood groups slowly transformed into violent street gangs. At first, they weren't called the Peaky Blinders. They were simply known as slogging gangs. The name came from their brutal street fights. These weren't sophisticated criminal organizations. They were territorial gangs. Each neighborhood protected its own streets. Each group fought for respect. Arguments outside pubs, dance halls, or busy street corners often ended with heavy belts, knives, boots, and broken bones. Violence became part of everyday life. But joining a gang wasn't always about becoming rich. For many young men, it meant protection, identity, status, and survival. The streets of Birmingham had become battlefields long before the world itself went to war. Then in March of 1890, a local newspaper printed 2 words that history would never forget: Peaky Blinder. At that moment, nobody could have imagined that more than a century later, those same 2 words would become one of the most recognizable names in television history. But the real story was only just beginning. The first time the name Peaky Blinder appeared in a newspaper wasn't because of a bank robbery or a criminal empire. It was because of a brutal street assault. On the night of March 22, 1890, a young man named George Eastwood walked into a pub in Birmingham called the Rainbow Public House. Instead of ordering beer, he asked for a bottle of ginger beer. It seemed like an ordinary decision, but it wasn't. Inside the pub sat a group of local young men already known in the neighborhood as the Peaky Blinders. They mocked Eastwood for his choice of drink. Not wanting trouble, he left the pub and started walking home. He probably thought the argument was over. He was wrong. As George walked beneath 2 railway bridges on Adderley Street, several men emerged from the darkness. They knocked him to the ground. Then came the kicks, the punches, and repeated blows from heavy belt buckles. The attack was so violent that George suffered a fractured skull and spent more than 3 weeks in the hospital. Doctors were forced to perform emergency surgery to relieve the pressure on his brain. Only one attacker, Thomas Mucklow, was eventually convicted. He received 6 months of hard labor. It was one of the first major incidents that connected the name Peaky Blinder with organized street violence. But despite what the television series suggests, these men were nothing like Tommy Shelby's organization. The real Peaky Blinders weren't wealthy businessmen. They didn't control politicians. They didn't run an international criminal empire. In fact, most of them were ordinary working-class teenagers and young men between the ages of 12 and 30. Many spent their days working in Birmingham's factories, foundries, or metal workshops. Crime wasn't always their full-time profession. For many, it was simply another way to survive in a city where opportunity was scarce. They stole wallets, picked pockets, intimidated shopkeepers, ran small gambling operations, and fought rival gangs over territory. Their victims were rarely powerful politicians or wealthy aristocrats. More often, they terrorized people living in the very same neighborhoods they came from. In many ways, they weren't glamorous outlaws. They were products of the harsh world around them. Yet there was one thing that made them stand out from every other gang in Birmingham: their appearance. While most working-class laborers wore practical, worn-out clothing, the Peaky Blinders dressed to be noticed. Tailored jackets, smart waistcoats, silk scarves, heavy leather boots, and carefully shaped hats worn at a distinctive angle. Looking respectable wasn't just about fashion. It was about power, respect, and reputation. If you looked confident, people thought twice before challenging you. Over time, their sharp appearance became just as famous as their violence. But it also gave birth to one of history's biggest myths: the story that they hid razor blades inside their caps. It's a story repeated countless times in books, on the internet, and of course, in the television series. But was any of it actually true? That's where the real mystery begins. One image has come to define the Peaky Blinders more than any other: a sharply dressed man, a flat cap pulled low over his eyes, and razor blades hidden inside its brim. It's one of the most iconic images in modern television. There's just one problem: it almost certainly never happened. For decades, people have believed that the Peaky Blinders stitched disposable razor blades into their caps, using them to slash the faces of their enemies. It sounds terrifying, it looks cinematic, and it makes for unforgettable television. But history tells a very different story. First, let's look at the timeline. The real Peaky Blinders were most active during the 1890s. However, disposable safety razor blades didn't become widely available in Britain until nearly 20 years later. At the time these gangs ruled Birmingham's streets, men still shaved using straight razors, large steel blades that simply couldn't be hidden inside a soft cloth cap. Then there's the question of cost. A factory worker in Birmingham earned only a small weekly wage. Disposable razor blades were expensive luxury imports. It would have cost a gang member far more than he could realistically afford just to ruin his own hat. And even if he had managed to sew one into the cap, it wouldn't have worked. A cloth cap provides almost no support or force. It simply isn't practical as a weapon. So, if the razor blade story isn't true, where did the name Peaky Blinder actually come from? The answer is surprisingly simple. In Victorian Birmingham slang, the word blinder didn't describe violence. It described appearance. Someone who looked exceptionally stylish. Someone who looked blinding. The word peaky referred to the pointed shape of their hats. Although the television series made flat caps famous, many historians believe the earliest Peaky Blinders actually wore hard felt hats known as billycocks. Gang members would carefully shape the brim to give it a sharper appearance and wear it tilted over one eye. Their hairstyle became just as recognizable. The sides and back were cut extremely short, while the hair at the front was left long and combed diagonally across the forehead. Combined with tailored jackets, silk scarves, waistcoats, bell-bottom trousers, and heavy leather boots, their appearance became a symbol of status. Looking dangerous was almost as important as being dangerous. There is another theory about the name. Some historians believe gang members would pull the peak of their cap down over a victim's eyes during a robbery, temporarily blinding them just long enough to escape without being identified. Unlike the razor blade story, this explanation is at least physically possible, but even today, historians continue to debate the exact origin of the name. One thing, however, is certain. The television series didn't invent the Peaky Blinders, but it did transform a small group of violent Birmingham street gangs into one of the most recognizable criminal legends in popular culture. The real Peaky Blinders disappeared more than a century ago, yet thanks to one television series, their name became immortal. But that raises another question. If Tommy Shelby never existed, where did he come from? And why does he feel so real? That's the story behind the man who created the legend. The man who never existed. If you've watched Peaky Blinders, you probably know Thomas Shelby better than the real Peaky Blinders themselves. Calm, calculating, fearless. A businessman, a gangster, a politician, a war hero. It almost feels impossible to imagine that none of it actually happened, because Tommy Shelby never existed. He wasn't a real gangster. He wasn't the leader of the Peaky Blinders. And there was never a Shelby family that built a criminal empire across Britain. So, where did he come from? The answer begins with one man, Stephen Knight, the creator of Peaky Blinders. Knight grew up in Birmingham, not far from the neighborhoods where the real gangs once ruled the streets. As a child, he often heard stories from his father about sharply dressed men walking confidently through Birmingham's back streets. Men who looked dangerous, powerful, and unforgettable. His father described them as being dressed immaculately. That image stayed with him for decades. Knight's family also had another connection to Birmingham's underworld. His mother worked as a bookmaker's runner during her childhood, carrying betting slips between customers and illegal bookmakers. Through family stories, old memories, and Birmingham's local folklore, Stephen Knight slowly built the world that would eventually become Peaky Blinders. But he never intended to make a documentary. Instead, he wanted to capture the feeling of Birmingham, its working-class spirit, its ambition, its violence, its pride. The Shelby family became a fictional lens through which those stories could be told. Then came the biggest casting decision of the entire series: Thomas Shelby. At first glance, Cillian Murphy didn't seem like the obvious choice. He wasn't from Birmingham, he wasn't physically imposing, and he didn't even have the accent. But Stephen Knight saw something else, a quiet intensity. The kind of presence that didn't need to shout. Murphy spent months preparing for the role. He studied the Birmingham accent until it became second nature. He transformed his posture, his voice, even the way Tommy walked, into something completely unique. Every movement felt deliberate, every pause carried meaning. With just a look, he could make an entire room feel uncomfortable. What made Tommy Shelby unforgettable wasn't his violence, it was his silence. Behind the sharp suits, the cigarettes, and the confident smile was a man carrying invisible wounds. A soldier who had survived the First World War, but had never truly escaped it. That emotional depth is what separated Peaky Blinders from an ordinary gangster drama, because beneath the crime, the politics, and the family rivalries, the series was always telling another story. The story of trauma, of grief, and of a generation trying to rebuild their lives after witnessing unimaginable horror. Tommy Shelby may have been fictional, but the emotions he carried were painfully real. And that's exactly why millions of people believed in him. Because while history gave us the setting, it was brilliant storytelling and an unforgettable performance by Cillian Murphy that turned Thomas Shelby into a legend. But perhaps the most surprising part of the story is that the world surrounding Tommy Shelby wasn't entirely fictional. Many of the people he encountered actually existed, and one of them would become one of Britain's most dangerous political figures. Chapter 5: Why Peaky Blinders Feels So Real. So, if Thomas Shelby never existed, why does he feel so real? The answer lies in the world around him. Although the Shelby family is fictional, many of the events and people in the series are rooted in real history. The First World War did leave behind an entire generation of broken soldiers. Thousands returned home carrying what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. Back then, there was no proper understanding of trauma. Many veterans struggled with nightmares, anxiety, depression, and the constant feeling that the war had never truly ended. Society expected them to simply move on, but many couldn't. Tommy Shelby became the fictional face of those forgotten men. His nightmares, his silence, his emotional distance, his inability to find peace were all reflections of what countless real soldiers experienced after returning home. The series also introduces another historical figure, Oswald Mosley. Unlike Tommy Shelby, Mosley was very real. He was a British politician who founded the British Union of Fascists during the 1930s. Inspired by the rise of fascism across Europe, Mosley dreamed of bringing a similar movement to Britain. His speeches attracted thousands. His rallies filled the streets. And for a moment, Britain stood dangerously close to embracing the same extremist ideology that was spreading across the continent. In the series, Tommy Shelby risks everything to stop Mosley. While the story itself is fictional, the threat was not. History tells us that fascism wasn't confined to Germany alone. It was growing across Europe. Even Britain faced its own battle against extremist politics. That historical backdrop gives the series a weight that many crime dramas never achieve. Peaky Blinders isn't just about gangsters. It's about class, power, trauma, politics, identity, and a country trying to rebuild itself after one of the darkest chapters in human history. Perhaps that's why the show resonates with so many people. Not because every event really happened, but because the emotions feel true. The fear, the ambition, the grief, the struggle to leave your past behind, those are timeless. The real Peaky Blinders were violent street gangs who walked the streets of Birmingham more than a century ago. Thomas Shelby never walked beside them. He was born not in history, but in the imagination of Stephen Knight, brought to life through the unforgettable performance of Cillian Murphy. Yet somehow, the fictional gangster became more famous than the real gang that inspired him. Maybe that's the true power of storytelling. History gives us the facts. Stories give those facts a heartbeat. And when the two come together, they create legends. So the next time you hear the name, Peaky Blinders, you'll know where the story ends and where the real history begins.